that like when people experience pain, it can make it very difficult for them to see God. It's often in the moment of pain where they finally do see God. But it also is true that when people experience pain, there can be like a lot of disillusionment. There can be a lot of, hold on, I didn't sign up for that. Like, how is God still good even though what I'm living through and experiencing, like, there's nothing good about this. Like, how is he still a good God and a good Father? And there's a lot of people who just would look at like a lot of us and they would go, man, like I just don't seem to be able to see what all of you see. I think this is the hurdle for a lot of people. In fact, I think this is a hurdle for a lot of people who we all maybe try to invite to church or try to talk to them about Jesus or get them to maybe engage spiritually, people in our family or friends or whoever it is. And a lot of people think, man, I tried religion, I tried prayer, tried church, tried following Jesus, and it just doesn't seem to work. It didn't meet my expectations. Life is still hard. But I think that whenever you start to lose your expectation to see God, you're going to struggle to see that he's right there in front of you. When you stop expecting to see God in your story, when you stop expecting him to show up and like do the impossible, when you stop expecting him to actually play the part of God in your life, you will always struggle to see that he's actually right there in front of you. He has never left. We're continuing on in a teaching series called Encountering Jesus. And I was preparing for the message this week and just started to think about a story from a few years ago where I one morning was on my way into the church and I was just feeling sluggish. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Like just like can't get it going. And I knew in that morning, I just knew like without the help of some caffeine, like it would be impossible for me to reach peak productivity. Like I just wouldn't be able to. And so I decided I was going to swing through Starbucks, get my classic grande Americano with an extra shot. No sugar, no cream, straight black, just like the good Lord intended, right? And just a little taste of heaven, amazing. And so I don't go to Starbucks a lot anymore. Lindsay and I think at one point in our life probably kept them in business and bad habit. And so we're like, make coffee at home more often. But it was one of those mornings where I was like, hey, I'm gonna. I don't know that I'm going to be able to function. So I was driving in and swung through the drive-thru and told the barista my order, pulled up to the window, paid for my drink. She hands me this cup of coffee, and as she is handing me this scalding hot 160-degree cup of coffee, something happens somehow where the cup begins to slip out of her hand. And so she squeezes the cup, trying to like pull it back, and it spills all over me and into my car, and I'm screaming. I'm like, and she's completely embarrassed, mortified. Her face is beet red, and I'm absolutely thinking of the famous McDonald's lawsuit from years ago, right? Where the woman won millions of dollars for something very similar, and this is a true story, right? And so it was crazy. I couldn't believe it. How many of y'all know? Like I was wide awake. I was not sluggish anymore, right? Like that's all it took. It just dumped some hot coffee in my lap. So. Man, like that, I think about that story because, needless to say, my experience at Starbucks that morning did not go the way that I had expected it to go, How many of y'all have some stories like that? How many of y'all have even more kind of important examples of where things in your life did not go exactly the way that you had thought they would? Or things did not go the way you had expected them to go. And, I look at my life and I think a lot about this. I think about a lot of the different challenges. I think a lot of the different times where just going through things, and it makes it real difficult to really see God at work. It can make it very difficult to really see Jesus in your life when life doesn't go the way you expected things to go. I think a lot of us are actually this way, in terms of missed expectations. I think nearly everyone probably gets married with this sort of idyllic or picturesque idea of what their future will eventually look like someday, and they soon find out, that as the years go by, that life is hard, that marriage is hard, that love will be tested. And it seems like when it comes to missed expectations, relationships in general are kind of up there at the top for most people. You thought someone would always be a part of your life or always be there for you, and they're just not for whatever reason, or you always thought they'd be part of your journey, always thought they'd be part of your story. And for whatever reason, either maybe they chose to separate themselves from you, or maybe even like a more painful example is someone who tragically passed away prematurely and was removed from your life before you ever expected them to be removed from your life. And maybe it's related to your career. Maybe you thought you'd be further down the road, thought you'd be achieving certain goals or hitting certain benchmarks by now, or getting ready to retire and thought you'd have more money saved up than you do right now. And it's just, I think that there's a lot of people who just look at their life and they're going, man, there's just a lot of missed expectations. Just a lot of things that like you thought would go differently than they've gone. And you ever notice in times of crisis, times of difficulty, times of struggle, how these moments seem to have a way of causing us to see things differently, kind of changing our perspective. And you go through some challenges, or you intake the media or the news, or you start to pay attention to everything going on around you. And I think that it can become very easy for us to kind of look out and look around and go like, man, where is God in all of this? Whether it's like really close and personal to you and your story and your journey, or whether it's like global or somewhere in like kind of the greater culture, you're going like, man, where is God? Like it can be very difficult sometimes to see God at work and moving and making a difference when life is seemingly not going the way like you thought it would or expected it to go. Is anybody able to relate to some of that? Okay. So let me just give you a thought here today as we kind of get started, just sort of like a foundational thought. I think that missed expectations have a way of distorting the lens through which we see life, often leaving us cynical and with an altered expectation about how things will now turn out. And as a result, we often lose our ability to see what is right in front of us. And for our context this morning, I think a lot of times that's just God, like right there in front of us, and we struggle to see him because like things have now become distorted because of missed expectation or life not going the way we thought it would go. There's a New York Times article written by Heather Murphy. It was entitled, "Why We Miss Objects That Are Right in Front of Us." In this article, she talks about these recent studies in the peer-reviewed scientific journal Current Biology that shows how expectations dramatically affect our ability to notice what's around us. So in other words, like if we don't expect to see it, we're going to miss it because we aren't looking for it. It's kind of the idea of these studies, and it's the idea of this article. And Christopher Chabris, he says, what we pay attention to is largely determined by our expectations of what should be present. And look at that again, like what we pay attention to is largely determined by our expectations of what should be present. So in other words, like without expecting something, we are unlikely to notice it. That's the idea. In fact, this is what scientists have termed inattentional blindness. Inattentional blindness. It's a phenomenon that describes how people are prone to walk by something, even look directly at it without seeing it, because they weren't expecting to see it. So an example in this article was that they did a case study where they taped cash to the leaves of a tree. Awesome, right? Like money really does grow on trees apparently. So I mean, it was that whole idea. And what they found is that people just walked on by. They didn't expect to see money on the leaves. So since they didn't expect to see money on the leaves of this tree, they just couldn't see it. They just continued to walk right on by, even though it was right in front of them. The money was literally in their view, right? It was in their line of sight. They didn't see it. It's right there in front of them. They didn't engage with it. They're close enough to see it. Their eyes just don't pick it up. And a lot of the reason comes down to the simple fact that they never expected to see it in the first place. And because they didn't expect to see it, their eyes weren't looking for it, and it was there. They just couldn't see it. They couldn't pick it up. Let me just give you a thought today that I think is going to help direct where we're going. Incorrect assumptions can inhibit our ability to see what's right in front of us. Incorrect assumptions. We all have assumptions. We all have perspectives. We all have ways of seeing life, and that's fine. Like, that's kind of how we live in general. Like that's sort of how it goes. Like you have to sort of have, some level of assumption or expectation or perception or perspective on life. But when those things are incorrect, when those things are skewed, when they're not the whole story, when there's another angle that you don't maybe notice or see or think of, it will inhibit your ability to sometimes even see what's right in front of you, to really see maybe what's actually going on. That's why you can have two people looking at the same thing and they see it differently, oftentimes. So we're continuing a teaching series this morning called Encountering Jesus. And in this series, we're looking at the different encounters and interactions people had with Jesus in the immediate days following the death and resurrection of Jesus, the immediate aftermath. If you think about, the death and resurrection of Jesus is a big deal to us, right? To Christians in general. We celebrate it, it's huge. Imagine the immediate hours or days, few days following the death of Jesus or following the resurrection of Jesus. It's pandemonium, right? For at least his followers, it's crazy. It's wild. Their expectations were completely blown, right? And so we want to look at this because I think there's so much we can take. Not just of people who ever encountered the physical Jesus in the flesh, but I think there's something about looking at the stories and the examples of people who encountered the risen Jesus, the risen Lord. And so what we're doing is we're looking at this period of time, this 40 days following the resurrection of Jesus. It's a period of time that church history has traditionally called Eastertide, and that's what we're in. In fact, Luke talks about this in Acts 1, verse 3. He says, after Jesus' suffering, he presented himself to them, gave many convincing proofs that he actually was alive. He appeared to them over a period of 40 days and spoke about the kingdom of God, right? So this is the Eastertide. It's the time between the resurrection of Jesus and his ascension into heaven, right? There on the Mount of Olives, as he gives the Great Commission to his disciples to go into all the world and to preach the gospel and to make disciples and to baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So this is a 40-day period. And many people, over 500 people, saw Jesus in the flesh in those days following his resurrection before he ascended into heaven. What's interesting to me about the days after Jesus' death, the days after his resurrection, is really the lack of expectation that people had in him coming back to life. You notice that? Even though he talked about it, even though he actually foretold that this is going to happen, the Son of Man is going to die and he's going to rise again on the third day. He talks about this. And yet for those who were the closest to Jesus, his closest followers, there seems to be a real lack of expectation that they had that this was actually going to happen. And as a result, some of the people who encounter Jesus after his resurrection, we find that they're actually staring at Jesus, but they either don't see him or they don't believe it's really him. They're their eyes are playing tricks on him. They're is that really? I'm not sure. It's Thomas going I know you look like Jesus, but I think I'm going to have to actually touch your side. I'm going to have to, I can't believe that's really you from the other side of the room. And so he has to come and I guess it really is you, right? And so in some cases, what we see in these examples is people are literally talking to Jesus, but they don't believe it's him or they don't realize it's him, simply because I think they did not expect Jesus to be alive. They actually expected him to be dead. Right? They didn't expect to see him, and so they didn't see him. Right? Inattentional blindness. So how many of you know that when someone dies, you don't expect to see them walking around? Let's give the guys some credit. Let's give these people some credit. That would blow your mind. Right? If you are at a wake and someone sits up, how many of y'all know, I'm running as fast as I possibly can, in the opposite direction. That's just not it's not an expectation we have. So, when someone dies, you don't just go around with this expectation that, hey, we're going to see them, at Hy-Vee later on today. That's just not your thoughts. And if you do see them, you're extremely confused, and you actually are starting to think there's something wrong with you. Your mind's playing tricks on you. I think we got to give some of these people a break because this is blowing their mind. It's blowing all of their expectations. And, and so I think that when it comes to Jesus, when it comes to the resurrected Lord, when it comes to these encounters he has with people and their struggle to see him really for who he is or to really be convinced that that's Jesus, I think we're similar. I think we have a lot of the same reactions. How many of y'all would admit that it can be difficult at times to really see Jesus in your own life? You can understand theoretically maybe that that's him and that he's there, but it can sometimes be difficult for us ourselves to see Jesus in our own life, to see him at work in the world, especially, man, with so much pain going on around us. And so I think this is the hurdle for a lot of people, in fact. I think this is a hurdle for a lot of people who we all maybe try to invite to church or try to talk to them about Jesus or get them to maybe engage spiritually, people in our family or friends or whoever it is. And a lot of people think, man, I tried religion, I tried prayer, tried church, tried following Jesus, and it just doesn't seem to work. It didn't meet my expectations. Life is still hard. How many of y'all know that like when people experience pain, it can make it very difficult for them to see God? It's often in the moment of pain where they finally do see God. But it also is true that when people experience pain, there can be like a lot of disillusionment. There can be a lot of, hold on, I didn't sign up for that. Like how is God still good even though what I'm living through and experiencing, like there's nothing good about this. Like how is he still a good God and a good Father? And there's a lot of people who just would look at like a lot of us and they would go, man, like I just don't seem to be able to see what all of you see. Like that's good for you. Like I know that you're a Christian and I'm fine, but like I don't seem to have the ability to see what you see. And so the story I want us to look at this morning actually comes out of Luke chapter 24, and it's the story of two guys who are living in the immediate days following the death of Jesus. They are living in Jerusalem during the immediate aftermath of the crucifixion. And what we know in this story is that these two men are completely devastated. Right? They're experiencing perhaps the worst moment of their life. These are two men who are followers of Jesus, right? And they are living in the aftermath of probably one of the most painful moments they've ever experienced. And they find themselves walking the 7-mile road from Jerusalem to a place called Emmaus, when seemingly out of nowhere, there is a stranger who appears on the very same road that they are walking on, begins to walk with them. And yet what these men do not realize is that this stranger who is walking with them on this road to Emmaus is the resurrected Son of God. It is Jesus himself who is walking with them. And I think there's something to just stop and look at right there really quick, because there's so much like amazing like truth in this story. But I think that whenever you start to lose your expectation to see God, you're going to struggle to see that he's right there in front of you. When you stop expecting to see God in your story, when you stop expecting him to show up and like do the impossible, when you stop expecting him to actually play the part of God in your life, you will always struggle to see that he's actually right there in front of you. He has never left. And so expectation really does matter. It's why I talked to our staff and our leaders this morning, that we come to church with our own expectation. Like we expect God to be here. We expect this to be more than just a Sunday morning, that we sort of check off the box and it's like, man, praise God, we went to church again. No. Like the God of the universe, Jesus himself wants to encounter you. He wants to encounter me, and we need to expect that in our life. And when we start to lose expectation that we're going to see God move in our story, move in our midst, then what's going to happen is it's going to become very difficult for us to see spiritual things happening in our life, to see God moving in great ways. And I think that this is a reality for these men because they're walking towards Emmaus and Jesus is with them, and yet they're unable to really see correctly. They don't realize that this is really Jesus, the man that they are mourning over, the man that they are crushed and devastated that he is no longer alive. So it goes on in verse 13. It says, now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they're talking with each other about everything that had happened. And as they talked and discussed these things with each other, look at this, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, what are you discussing together as you walk along? They stood still, their faces downcast, right? One of them, named Cleopas, asked Jesus, are you only a visitor to Jerusalem and do not know the things that have happened there in these days? So he's basically saying, like, are you living under a rock? Like, how do you not know? Like, everybody knows what's just happened. Jesus says, well, what things? And they said, well, it's about Jesus of Nazareth. He was a prophet. He was powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. So this is what's going on, right? They're devastated. They're downcast. They're discouraged. And the story of these two men encountering Jesus on the road to Emmaus Do you know, the Bible tells us it happens the very same day that Jesus rose from the dead. This is right after in terms of the Bible, it's right after the story of Mary Magdalene, right? That same day is what Luke is telling us here. That same day, these two men are walking and Jesus appears to them. So this is the same day. This is the very first Easter morning, right? 2,000 years ago when this takes place. And here's what we know. We know that these two men are, in fact, believers in Jesus. They're followers of Jesus. We don't know a whole lot else about them. In fact, one of the men we know was named Cleopas. That's pretty much all we got. The other man, we don't even know his name. Some think he might have been one of the original 12 disciples for some reasons I'll get to in a moment here, but that would really just be a guess. We do not know who the other man was. And at first reading in this story, it kind of just looks like these two men are sort of walking along, they're shooting the breeze, maybe even talking about the weather, talking about the news of the day, whatever it is. But when you really dig in, like in reality, their conversation had to be much more serious and much more intense than just that. There had to have been a somber and a crushing tone to their conversation because like these two men are Jewish men. Don't forget that. And for centuries, like hundreds of years, at least 700 years, within their culture and within their faith, man, there had been stories and there had been prophecies and there had been rumors that one day God would send a Messiah who would rescue them from their oppression and return them to their dominant place in the world. And you see these two guys who are walking towards Emmaus, they've grown up in a culture where certainly their parents would have talked to them about the Messiah. They've grown up in a culture where certainly their grandparents would have talked to them about the Messiah, their great-grandparents, all of it. That one day God would send the Messiah and that he would be the savior of their people and that he would establish a kingdom that would never end. And this is their hope. This is what they look for. This is like what gets them through all of those oppressive years, like for, during the span of hundreds of years where they're in slavery, they're in exile. The hope they have is they're looking forward to the one day Messiah that God would send to be their deliverer. And so these guys right here, like are it just so happens that in their lifetime, as they've been hoping, as they have been expecting, as they've been praying and wishing and dreaming that there is a rabbi by the name of Jesus of Nazareth who kind of shows up on the scene, and he's unlike anyone that they have ever heard of. He's unlike anyone that they've ever experienced before. Like he could do undeniable, bona fide miracles. And when he spoke, it was so powerful. It was authoritative. He spoke like one who had authority. It was unlike any kind of speaking or teaching that they had heard from other rabbis before. Jesus was not normal. They knew that. They could pick up on that. And so they had to be thinking, amongst themselves, like, could this Jesus actually be the one we've been waiting for? Right? Maybe he is. Like, we sure hope he is the one that we have all been waiting for. And what you find in their story and their journey is that eventually, after following Jesus around for a while, watching and observing, listening to him teach and witnessing the different miracles that he performed, like these men, as well as others, decided to put all of their faith into believing that Jesus really was the long-awaited Messiah. He was the promised one. He's the one that everyone's been waiting for such a long time. Now, that's great, but the problem in this story is that 3 days prior to them walking on this road to Emmaus, the man that they put their faith in is crucified on a cross outside of the city. And as a result, all of their dreams of Jesus being the Messiah died in that moment with him. Man, this was the moment of all moments, right? Where they realized that their life was not going on the path that they had hoped. This was the moment when they realized that their life was not going to be the way that they thought it would be. It was the moment of extreme disappointment. All of their expectations are clearly not going to happen. Man, and the reality is, I think many of us are like that. Many of us know what that's like. Like these two men, you have to ask yourself the question, like, what do you do when there's nothing you can do? What do you do when you wake up one day and you think, man, this wasn't in the master plan, thought things would be better than this? What do you do when, like, you reach adulthood and all of a sudden, like your parents split? What do you do when you put all of this effort into a relationship that's not working out the way you thought it would? Maybe You've experienced, the painful reality of divorce and know what it's like to be a single parent and the parting and going your separate ways. It's come much sooner, much quicker than you ever expected it to. Maybe for some of you, like it's health related. Like I didn't plan on this, didn't expect to go through this. And whatever it is, I think that when things don't go as expected, we can feel a little disoriented. Like I didn't have grid work for that. I didn't know that was in the cards. I didn't know like I was going to deal with that diagnosis. I didn't know my family was going to act like that. I was going to have tragedy of this nature. And so we can start to feel a little disoriented. And I say that because like that's exactly what's going on in this story. As you try to insert yourself and try to walk along the path with them and Jesus, you can sense these two men just really disoriented. Like this is not what we thought. Like we thought like, man, Jesus is about to like take over, right? He's about to ascend to the throne and life is going to be amazing and all of it's over. And beyond that, think about the fact that they have followed Jesus, anywhere from like 1 to 3 years, right? I don't know when they picked up following Jesus along the way, but like, can you imagine them also just going like, man, what a waste? I mean, did we really just put our life, our hope, our dreams, like, did we bank all of that on like basically some cult leader who like said he was something that he's not? And that's exactly where these guys were. They've in many ways put their entire hope in Jesus being this long-awaited Messiah, and all their hopes have been shattered. They're walking along. Luke tells us they're walking along. They're talking about these things, and their hearts are filled with so many missed expectations. In verse 15, it says that as they walked, they discussed these things with each other. Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. Look at verse 16, but they were kept from recognizing him. Let me just give you like a truth it's actually really hard to learn and it's really hard to teach. There's no joy in this, but it's true and it's real and it's good for you and it's good for me. And it's just this, that sometimes God will intentionally keep you from seeing him. Sometimes. You see, in this story, the answer was right there in front of them. They could not see it. Why did they not see Jesus? He's walking with them. They don't have the ability to kind of pick up on the fact that like this is the one that we're upset about, that we're crying about. Like think about it. The life-changing truth is standing right there in front of them. They just don't see it. And we look at the story and we don't fully understand why. Like why is this their experience? Maybe it's because Jesus is thinking, man, I got to teach you something first. Maybe it's because Jesus is thinking, man, I'm going to keep your eyes closed and then bam, I'm going to surprise you. Like surprise, it's me. We don't know exactly why it was this way, but for whatever reason, Jesus wasn't letting these men see that he was with them. These men are scared, they're discouraged, hope is gone, and the entire time, man, they're walking on this road. The answer's already there. They just didn't see it. Let me just give you a couple thoughts today. The times when God seems absent or distant or like he's a no-show is actually part of his design at times for you and for me. Because he's really trying to get to this thought right here. Can you still believe when you cannot see? Can you still believe when you cannot see? And I want to just give you like something. I want you to catch this. Like open up your spirit right now to receive this. Like just because God seems to be silent doesn't mean that he's absent. And just because it seems like, man, like he's a no-show or he's not engaged or not involved or I can't hear from him or there were times in my life where God seems so much closer and I don't know where he is now. Like just because he seems silent or you're unable to perceive his proximity to you, it does not mean that he is absent from your life. What you feel isn't necessarily true. I like what Mark says in Mark 8:18. He says, do you have eyes but fail to see? Ears but fail to hear? Like, don't you remember? Like, is what he's getting at here. You have, I mean, this is us, right? Like, you say you can see, but you can't see. You have eyes like ears, like, can you see? Can you hear? Like, can you remember, man, God is faithful and he is with you and he has never left you. Isaiah 42:16, look what God says in this great ancient text. Through the prophet Isaiah, he says, I will lead the blind by ways they have not known. Along unfamiliar paths, I will guide them. And catch this, I will turn the darkness into light before them and make the rough places smooth. And I just love, this is the promise of God. That you and I, like, we will go through times in our life where, like, it actually is difficult for us to see. Where it does feel dark. We do feel a sense of disorientation. Like, how many of y'all know when you cannot see, you're disoriented? Like, there's a reality to that. Like, there's a dark, even when there's a spiritual blindness or darkness that you have, there's a disorientation that happens to you as a result of that. And God is reminding us, he's telling us here in Isaiah 42 that he's going to turn that darkness into light. He's going to make these rough places smooth. And we have to see sometimes that, man, God is up to something. There are things he is doing that will produce life and fruit in us. But man, it's not fun. It's not fun to go through the process. In fact, look at this. Like, I think that there are times God will let you feel defeated so that when you overcome, you know that it was him and not you. Not because he's going to let you lose. Not because like, hey, let's just let these guys feel, like terrible. But like, it's this reminder from God that, like, he is God and I am not. So that when I do eventually overcome in my life, I'm like, all glory, praise, and honor goes to him and to him alone, not to me. The problem for so many people is that most people who lose hope do so in the moments when they can't see. You can't see, and, like, man, it's just tough. It's tough. Like, there was an experiment scientists did with rats, which I thought was really fascinating. They took, like, a bunch of rats and they put them in, like, this aquarium. Wanted to see basically how long they'd last. They shut off all the lights. It was pitch black. They lasted 17 minutes. They all drowned to death. They decided, okay, let's add, like, another variable to the experiment. So then they decided, okay, what we'll do is we will leave like a little light on in the room. They lasted for 3 days. Just a little bit of hope. Just a little bit of light. They decided to do it like another variation of the experiment where they left them in for a little while, and then they came in and they took them out of the aquarium, out of this tank of water for a period of time, and then they put them back in, shut the lights off, left that little light on in the corner. They lasted for like days, because even though it wasn't a great situation to be in, like, they had in their memory bank, like, there's a possibility of being rescued. Look, like I think that most people who lose hope, they do so when they just can't see. Life is hard. They just can't see a way out. And I think that's exactly what's going on with these guys. Like, these men in this story, they're discouraged. They've lost hope, and yet hope is standing right there in front of them. The hope of the world is standing right there in front of them, walking with them step in step. And they don't have hope. Verse 21, these men look at Jesus and they're saying about all the news going on in Jerusalem and Jesus of Nazareth, and he was crucified. And they say in verse 21, we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. Right? They're speaking to what they had expected, what they had dreamed about, what they had hoped, that he would be the Messiah, the one who would come and deliver the people of Israel from the oppression of Rome and reestablish them as like a dominant force in the world, establish a kingdom that would never end. And they're saying, we had hoped that was going to happen. And what is more, it's the third day since all this took place, meaning there is no hope of a resurrection. In verse 22, in addition, some of our women amazed us, right? They went to the tomb early this morning, didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive, and then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. So they're actually hearing testimony, firsthand testimony from these women. They've already heard the story. Like, some people are saying Jesus is alive, and yet they can't believe it. They're still downcast, and they're walking with the resurrected Lord, aren't able to see it. And I look at these verses because, like, man, I just sense so much emotion, like, in that phrase. But we had hoped, right? Like, there's so much in that. Like, we had hoped. We had hoped, and there's so many shattered hopes and dreams, like, in that statement. Like, We'd hoped, and it's obvious that what we had hoped for is not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Let me give you a big thought for today. Feeling defeated is not the same as being defeated. Feeling defeated is not the same as being defeated because what you feel is not always real. I don't want you to get me wrong, don't get me wrong on that, right? Like when you're feeling something, you're really feeling it. You know, it's not like a fake feeling. It just doesn't mean that it's real. Like it just doesn't mean that that's the whole picture. That's the whole story. It doesn't mean that your perspective is as correct as you might assume it is. These men in this story, man, they feel crushed. They feel like they've lost. They feel defeated. And all of their feelings are present. All of their feelings are intense and they're real. But just because they feel defeated in the moment doesn't mean that they actually are defeated. Being defeated isn't the same as, or feeling defeated isn't the same as being defeated. You ever found yourself in a season of like, but we had hoped? You ever found yourself in a season like that? Times when you thought something would happen differently, it's clearly not going to happen. Like, man, hope to have children, hoped to be celebrating an anniversary, had hoped certain people, certain friends, relationships would still be intact, hoped to have good health. I mean, right? All probably hope for a different political outcome. Like all of us, still hoping for a third option. Like, I mean, right? I mean, it's just kind of, I mean, you ever been in a season of but we had hoped? And that's where these guys are at in this story. That's where they're at in this story. And look at this, like walking along with them was the risen Christ, powerful in word and deed. And they could not see him, and they were completely distraught. You see what I've noticed about myself over the years, and I've seen it in others too, is that sometimes when we face things that we didn't expect to face, we actually can find ourselves becoming less than we once were. And what I mean by that is I have been at places where in my life where I would say spiritually I was in a great place. I was solid, strong, growing, progressing, and life doesn't go the way I expected it to go. And all of a sudden, before I even realize it, I've become less than I once was. And I've seen that in people as well, where you become spiritually jaded. You're just I don't know, a little disillusioned. Man, I thought God would and he didn't, so I don't know what to think about that. Or struggling to trust God as a result of life experiences and things. And I've just seen it in myself where the fire starts to just go out. The fire just starts to get smaller. And it's not that I've abandoned my faith or I've just stopped following Jesus. It's just man, I didn't expect that. And I've seen that in a lot of people as well. I've seen that in some of you. It's just bound to happen where, we go through things and that fire starts to dim if we let it. We find ourselves becoming less than we once were. Man, I was just on fire for God. I was just pursuing the things of God, just completely abandoned and fully surrendered to all of that. And now it's just I don't know. I'm just, it's a lot. It's hard. Well, let me share with you a truth, right? A really important truth this morning. That oftentimes your disappointment with God will become the very thing that allows you to eventually see him. And man, I've noticed this for myself, that it is often in the place of great disappointment and pain, in the place of missed expectations, where God begins to open my eyes. And I would suspect that it's that way for a lot of us. Wow, I didn't realize. Who am I? God, you are so faithful. Who am I? I can't believe you've always been there, even when I thought you weren't. And in verse 25, Jesus said to them, right, he starts to rebuke these guys. They're talking about Jesus of Nazareth, how he's died, and all that stuff. And he says, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ or the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, Jesus explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. All right, so he goes back to Genesis 1:1. He's all right, are you this? I mean, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He goes back to the beginning. He's like, let's do this. We got some time. We got 7 miles. I'm just going to start reciting like the Torah to you. Is that not enough? Let's get into the prophets right now. And I'm going to remind you of all the prophetic messianic prophecies about me, about Jesus, and why you should have hope right now and not be downcast, not be discouraged, but you should be expectant that something powerful is about to take place. So Jesus does this, right? And it says as they approached the village in verse 28 to which they were going, Jesus acted as if he was going farther. But they urged him strongly, stay with us, for it's nearly evening. The day is almost over. So he went in to stay with them. I like that. I like just he's very sly. I like you think you invited me, but I was setting you up the whole time. But man, even after this journey on the road to Emmaus, like they still don't see that it's Jesus who's with them. They still don't see that. They're having the scriptures recited to them. I mean, it's got to be for hours, and they still don't see that this is Jesus. So Jesus goes into their home and begins to share a meal with them, and this is where everything begins to flip. In verse 30, when Jesus was at the table with them, look at this. He took bread, he gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Is there anywhere else in the scriptures where you see language like this? Like 3 days earlier? And that's why there's a lot of people who wonder if that second man on the road actually was one of the 12. Because what we find here is that like their eyes all of a sudden are opened, they recognize it's Jesus, and then he disappears from their sight, does a Houdini. He's out of there. And could it be that like one of these was present at the Last Supper, or could it be that they at least are close enough to the original 12 disciples that they've had this story already told to them? It's only 3 days old. And they're sitting there and they're looking at Jesus, and he has taken the bread, he's given thanks, and he begins to break it, passes it to them, and they're like, oh my goodness. Their eyes are opened. I mean, it's kind of like, when everything starts swirling, like in a movie, and you get to the end, and you're like, I can't believe, you start connecting the dots. You're like, whoa, that was crazy. Your mind's blown. Like, that's what's happening here. And all of a sudden, they can see that Jesus was with them all along, and now their spiritual eyes are open. They're open. And look at this with me. When your eyes begin to open, you start to see that there was actually a purpose in the process. When you start to see correctly, when you start to see clearly, you can, I think, maturely understand there was purpose in that process. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong here. I want to explain that, because there is not always purpose in every pain that you go through. God is not always. It's not like, hey, I'm going to give you this, like so that because there's a bit greater purpose for it. No. Like that's bad teaching. That's bad theology. However, He is faithful to always pull purpose out of every pain. He's faithful to pull meaning out of everything we walk through, so that there's not a wasted season, there's not a wasted moment, there's not a wasted tragedy, there's not a wasted disappointment, there's not a wasted missed expectation. He is faithful. He knows how to take those things that, man, we didn't expect to walk through, that he didn't deal us, we just went through because life is hard, and he's able to go, man, like there's redeeming value in that story, redeeming value in that situation, and I'm going to pull it out right now. When your eyes begin to open, you start to see, man, there's more to this. There's actually a purpose in the process. How many of y'all know this? Y'all can testify to that, right? That when you look back in your life, you can see that God was actually with you, but in the moment, you felt as if he was nowhere to be found. Do you know what that's like? And I just want to tell you something, man, that when you look back, when you look back on your story, when you look back on your journey and you can see him in your past, it'll give you faith to recognize him in your present. It's often hard to see Jesus in the present. It's often hard because our perspective, man, it gets distorted, and we're like, we can just get so wrapped up in how wrong everything is that we lose track of all that is right and all that is good. But when you look back in the rear view mirror, man, it's so much easier to see Jesus. Like, he was there. Like, he was really there. He was really good. Like he was there. Like he was really there. He was working in all things, to bring about good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Like he was really there. Like he was with me as I look back on my brokenness. He was faithful. Like he didn't leave. He was there. Like he was there in my sickness. He was there in my loneliness, in my despair. Like God was there. He was faithful. He was there in my desperation. I didn't see him at the time, but as I look back, I can see him all over my story. Is there anybody who can testify to that kind of experience? Like you didn't see him in the moment, but as you look back, you're like, oh man, his fingerprints are all over my journey. They're all over my story. He was with me. He was with me. And I'm getting ready to close this down, but I'm also feel like I'm getting ready to preach a little bit. So I don't know, hold back for just a second. Like and you can come on up if you want, but you might be strumming for a minute. So let me give you a big thought today, okay? Huge thought. Like what you see is not all there is. Huge thought. What you see with your eyes is not all that there is. And some of you, man, there are some things that you see in the natural right now in your story, in your life. And I want to just tell you something right now. That is not all that there is. That's not all that there is. Some of you, man, you see a diagnosis in the natural, but I want to tell you that that's not all that there is. Some of you, man, you see a failing relationship, and I want to just remind you that that might be true, but it's just not all that there is. Some of you see like an impossible amount of bills. Man, I just want you to know that that's not all that there is. See a dead-end, hopeless situation, it's not all that there is. Man, I really came here to tell you that God wants to give you eyes to see Jesus, to see him in your story, to see him at work, to see him moving in your life, to realize that no matter what mountain stands in front of you, no matter what giant is on the road in front of you, like see Jesus because he's so much bigger. He is so much bigger. Do you remember the story in the Old Testament? You remember the story of Elijah and his servant, right? And they're running for their life. They get to this little house and they go and they hide in this house, and because the armies of this other nation are like coming to hunt them down and kill them, and so they sleep. They wake up one morning and like the servant is just getting a cup of coffee. He's just drinking his morning cup of coffee, opens up the door, and they are completely surrounded by this other army. Completely surrounded by them. Like, didn't hide real well. Got found. So the servant freaks out, wakes Elijah up like, hey, we're about to die. And Elijah, like very calmly, he's just like, God, would you open up his eyes so he can see? God opens up his eyes and he looks out and he sees all around this other army is a much bigger, more vast army. It's the army of God, and it is surrounding them. What you see is not all that there is. What you see in the natural, let's not downplay it. It's real. It's just not all that there is. It's just not all that there is. God wants to give you eyes to see Jesus. He wants to open your eyes so that you can see him in your current circumstance. He wants you to know that he's there, that he has not left you. Others of you, man, God, he wants to open your eyes so that you can see Jesus for the first time. I mean, to be quite honest with you, like, man, the reality is there's some of you, man, you've heard the story of Jesus so many times, like, but your eyes are still not open to the life that he has invited you into. And it's time right now for like supernaturally for God to just open your eyes so that you can see Jesus for who he really is and to see the real life that is life. Take him up on his offer to come and rescue you and change everything about you. 2 Corinthians 4:4, Paul writes this and he says, the God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so that they cannot see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. So lowercase g right there, the God of this age, that's referring to the devil. It's the devil. It's referring to this sort of spiritual reality. He's blinded the minds of unbelievers so that they actually cannot see. It's just an amazing thought. It's a powerful thought here. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, right? Like there is a spiritual reality to why people are blind. When you look out and you struggle to see Jesus in your life, there's oftentimes a spiritual reality to that. There's oftentimes a reason why. Like the enemy doesn't want you to see Jesus at work. And many of us, man, we've heard the story of Jesus. Most of us can even tell the story of Jesus, but some of you haven't really seen the story of Jesus as it applies to you. Because once you really see it, man, you can't stay the same. When you recognize that the tomb is empty and what that actually means, that you can be forgiven, that you can be healed, that you can be set free, that life can change, like everything begins to shift in your life as a result. Man, Jesus just wants to open your eyes. He wants to open your minds so that you can see. And that's exactly what he did with the disciples later on in this very same chapter in Luke 24. So we'll get into this story next week, I think. But later on in this chapter, he appears to his disciples, right? Walks right through the wall. And they're just stunned. They're just like, what? Like, this is where Thomas doubts, and this is all of it. Like, is this really him? And you get to the end of the story, and after they've spent some time with Jesus, it says in verse 45 that then Jesus opened their minds so they could understand the scriptures. He told them, this is what is written, the Christ, the Messiah, right, will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day. And repentance and forgiveness of sins will be preached in his name to all nations, beginning here in Jerusalem. You are witnesses to these things. I'm going to send you what my Father has promised. He's talking about the Holy Spirit right now. But stay in the city until you've been clothed with power from on high. They actually had the inability to fully comprehend and understand all these things Jesus had been teaching them. Their minds really had been blinded, didn't have good vision, spiritual vision. Jesus, in this moment, he opens up their minds so they can see. They can understand the scriptures. They understand what's really going on. And I just think, man, there's a lot of us in this place, whether you've been a follower of Jesus for a long time or not, it doesn't really matter. Like, because some of us in here could just say, man, I'm struggling with my vision, my ability to see properly. And today, in God's goodness and in God's grace, he just wants to open up your eyes to give you proper vision once again. So that you can get back in to the fight, so that you can get off the sidelines and off the bench and just back into living this thing the way we're supposed to live it, to make a difference, to see correctly what God has done in us, what the empty tomb really means, to bring this hope to people who really need it. But man, you got to have spiritual eyes. You got to have eyes that can look beyond the natural. You got to have eyes that can look beyond the physical. You got to have eyes that can look beyond what is present in your life and go, man, there is more to this than what I see. And look, there are so many moments in my story and in my journey where if I had had spiritual eyes, it would have made all the difference for me. Man, I could just start going down the list. I remember when I was 8 years old. I remember when my sister, suddenly I remember when she died, and 8 years old, I just remember it was a traumatic, formative moment for me, and I just remember it struggling with something from that moment on, going man, where is God in all of this? I remember the disconnect of being taught and raised in a Christian home and trust God and God is good and God is faithful and matching that up with how is this good? I remember in my dad's church growing up, I remember I was 13 years old. I remember what it's like. I remember having every major news station in the back of the auditorium on a Sunday morning as the youth minister in my dad's church had been arrested for doing inappropriate things with kids in the church. And I just remember that. I remember being talk about that forever just changing. Having I'm 13, right? Who do you trust? Who's good? How does this happen? And just, man, spiritual eyes would have made all of the difference. I remember times in my life growing up. I remember when God miraculously provided for my family. I remember coming home from a time when we were in California, and we came home, and some people had gotten the keys to our house from our church, and they had stocked all the cupboards. They had like done like an extreme makeover to like the interior of the house, and I just was like, whoa, like this is crazy. And just being so excited that we had name brand like chips and stuff, and like it was just awesome, but like struggling still, like through like different things that had kind of formed my vision, like not seeing like Jesus in that, not realizing, man, that this is his hands and his feet and his provision and his faithfulness. I remember when Lindsay and I were married, I remember the very first job that I had in ministry. I remember getting called into a board meeting where they decided to cut my entire salary in half one day. I remember walking home to my wife. We had our 14-year-old right here was 1 month old. And I remember just like weeping, feeling like such a failure, feeling like what in the world, like how could they do this? And all of that kind of stuff. And just where spiritual eyes would have made all the difference. Where like I struggled to really see Jesus in that moment, struggled to see him in my story. And I remember us then like going through a period of 3 years of trying to like sell our house here in Des Moines, and doing double payments, like living in a tiny little like 700 square foot 2-bedroom home. Is that even a thing? But it was like paying $500 like a month for that little house, and then like paying our mortgage down here for like 3 years, just been like, God, where are you? Like, hello? Like having like real like knock down, drag out moments with God, saying like I am tired of like preaching something like to people and telling them to hang on and have hope and have faith when I'm struggling to see you actually show up and do what you say you're good for. And just really having like a crisis of faith and a crisis of belief myself, where spiritual eyes would have made all the difference, man. I remember, as I've told so many times, I remember 7 years ago here in July when my Uncle Rick had a massive heart attack and going through like the most painful year of my life until he passed away a year later. I remember just like hanging on and having like faith, God's gonna heal. I remember people calling us and having like words from God that they said like, man, it's all gonna change, and like, he's gonna walk out of that hospital and this and that, and just like becoming so disillusioned, like just like, where is good, there any good in this? And I just, what happens is, as I mentioned earlier, is I think it's so easy in these times to just become sort of jaded spiritually. To just sort of go, man, I'm not like giving up on Jesus. I'm not giving up on my faith, but like I have there's a distortion where like I'm just not seeing life the way I should see it. I'm not seeing it like with like hope and joy and like passion, like for who he really is. And let me just tell you guys something, like in my story and in my journey, like God has like lit a fire again, like it's just lit it up. Like, yeah, life is terrible at times, and life doesn't go the way we want, and there is missed expectations, but like he is faithful and he is good. And as I look back on my journey and my story, he's never once not been there. He's never once not been there. He has stepped into my story and into my journey. He stepped into my family and our story. He's rescued us. And he still does that. And I want to bring a word of encouragement to you that when you struggle to see Jesus, when you don't know where he is at, when you're just like, man, I don't know that I can keep going on any longer like this, listen to me. He's right there. He's right there. He is with you. He's with you. Last thought of the day, right here. Look at this. Jesus is always with us. The question is, can you see him? I came here today just to really ask you that very simple question. Can you see Jesus? Can you see him? He's with you. Would you stand with me this morning? Would you just bow your heads for just a quick moment? And I apologize for the time, but I, sort of feel bad about it. But listen to me. Every head bowed for just a moment. Hey, we're gonna get you out. We got stuff to do. I get it. But these are moments where we don't just want to let like our hungry bellies tell us to just kind of call it good. I'm gonna invite our prayer team forward. If you need any prayer today for anything, there's something God's been ministering to you about as I've been preaching this morning, and you just need to kind of take it to that next step. Just be encouraged, be ministered to in prayer. Our ministering prayer team will be up here at the front. But if you need prayer for anything, really, healing in your body, relationships, emotional pain, whatever you're dealing with, like just come and get ministered to by these people who are trained to pray. But would you just bow your heads here? If you just would acknowledge and say, Pastor Jordan, as you're talking today, man, I know that like I need God to supernaturally open my eyes. Like my vision is skewed. I'm struggling to see him clearly at work in my life, and I just need to I need something to shift and change there for me. Can I just see your hands? Can I just see you today? I want you to start to grab my faith for your story. I got faith for you. I got faith for you. What he's done for me, he can do for you. Anybody else? You just need that right now. You need to start seeing differently. Jesus, I pray right now that you would supernaturally start to open up eyes so that we could see the way you intended us to see. God, I thank you that you are faithful, that there is none like you, that you promise to never leave us, you promise to never forsake us, you promise to never just like step out and let us figure it out on our own. And so God, I pray that for those of us in this room, my friends, my brothers, my sisters who are struggling with their spiritual eyes, their spiritual vision, God, that in this place, in this moment, they would have such an awakening of in their spirit right now, that you would wake them up right now to your faithfulness, to your goodness, to your proximity to them and to their story. And God, I am grateful. I am grateful that I can stand up here today and tell all of my friends here this morning that what we see is not all that there is. And so would you put that truth like deep in our soul and deep in our spirit? God, I just thank you that for every person in here who has a child who's struggling spiritually or dealing with all kinds of issues, God, I thank you that what we see is not all that there is, that what we look at is not the whole story. God, I thank you for every person in this room right now who's battling some issues financially. I thank you that what they see when they get done paying their bills is not all that there is. And I pray for deep faith. I pray for deep faith to take them, God, to a place where they would trust you in ways that they never have, to live by faith, to walk by faith. God, I thank you that for whatever relationships exist in this room right now, where there has been pain and brokenness, where it looks like there is no hope, God, I thank you that your track record is still good. Your track record is still true. That time after time after time, for thousands of years, you have done the impossible. You have brought people together who should not be together. You have brought people together who really should, in the natural, go their separate ways. And so, God, I thank you that what we see in the natural is not the whole story. It's not all that there is. It's not all that there is. And so faith, rise in this house this morning, God. I pray that faith would increase in this house right now, oh God. I pray for the gift of faith in this place right now. Holy Spirit, move in power. Would you settle in this place? In Jesus' name. Come on.